Darjeeling tea, Café de Colombia, Prosciutto de Parma, canned hot pepper, champagne, tequila, argan oil, Swiss watches, cholicanas, and Bohemia Crystal have in common? Yes, they are all well-known products that have prestige among consumers. But the story doesn't end there. The taste, qualities, aesthetics, and reputation of these products are all deeply tied to their geographic origins. Each product has a legacy built upon unique environmental conditions and local traditions from their specific regions of origin. In the legal world, they are known as appellations of origin or geographical indications. The World Intellectual Property Organization runs an international registration system that makes it easier to protect these product names and their legacy. Known as the Lisbon System for International Registration of Appellations of Origin and Geographical Indications, it ensures, for example, that only pepper that genuinely comes from a specific region in Cambodia and meets the predefined traditional production requirements can be called and sold as canned hot pepper. This special protection is available in every country of the Lisbon system. To spice up their sales, all that pepper producers need to do is to apply through the World Intellectual Property Organization for the protection of their region-specific brand. It's not just the Cambodian pepper producers that benefit from the Lisbon system. Producers of many other traditional local products do too. The small-scale farmers, the artisans, and the business owners. They all want stronger protection for their local and traditional products in global markets. And the consumer? They get assurance about the quality, authenticity, and traceability of those products. The Lisbon system is an all-in-one solution for producers seeking protection for their geographical indications and appellations of origin in multiple countries.
Grammarly can help you write quickly and confidently, so you never have to slow down at work. Instant corrections make your writing mistake-free.
Azielo PDO, Specatoare de PGI, Pecorino Romano PDO, Uncommon Flavors of Europe. Let's take a look at how the European Union quality system works. PDO and PGI, what are they and what do they mean? PDO and PGI are essentially quality certification marks given by the European Union that attest to specific traditions and qualities of food. The acronyms stand for Protected Designation of Origin, PDO, and Protected Geographical Indication, PGI. These are basically fancy words to say that it matters where your food comes from and that the products carrying these logos have gone through rigorous quality controls. So what's the difference between the two? To put it simply, a PDO product is made from step A to Z in a specific area of origin. From the growing of the feed the animals eat to the aging of the product need to happen right there in the same area. For a PGI product instead, at least one of the stages of production, processing, or preparation takes place in a specific area. The stage of production must lead to a specific quality attributable to its geographical origin. Both certifications share a lengthy and full screening process too.
Oh, hi everyone. Okay, so today's our short class, and I'm showing you a presentation on the European Union system of protected designation of origin and protected geographical indications regarding products that the European Union produces for consumption, typically food and beverage. So if you raise, I should say, a pork, and you make prosciutto di Parma, which is a kind of pork that comes from Parma, Italy. It's famous around many places. You can only call that kind of prosciutto, that kind of pork di Parma, of Parma, if it comes from Parma, Italy. And the European Union has set up a copyright system so that those names are reserved, famous names, those famous brands are reserved, those famous trademarks, if you will, are reserved for those products coming from that region. And of course, the producers of those of those products are very happy about that. And, you know, since the European Union is 80% about business and trade and creating the single market, right? Having a single market includes regulation of products, the common set of rules that have to be enforced. And you're reading this week in the 2 chapters assigned from the textbook about regulation, about the bodies set up, including the European Court of Justice, as well as the European Central Bank, but also the other agencies that have all been set up to standardize common regulations in Europe. One single set of regulations, rules and regulations for agriculture or finance or production well, you saw, for example, how last week, how the European Commission is going to adopt the law, is proposing a law to come up with one set of rules regarding connectors for recharging on your mobile devices, your laptops, your tablets, your smartphones, creating a single market out of now 27 member states who have, until relatively recently, a long national history of being separate with their own national market, right? The market for Italy, the national market for Germany, the national market for France, trying to create a single market out of 27 member states that have a long history, long before they became members of the European Union. It's a lot of work. It's exhausting, time-consuming, negotiation, bargaining, decision-making, and it's often very emotional. It's often very emotional, very stressful, because when we're talking about, for example, food, we're talking about culture. We're talking about culture. And again, the European Union's designation of certain products as being only having the right to have that name has big economic implications. But if you're a French grower of grapes, a vineyard, you make you're a wine producer, and of course the whole world knows about champagne, right? Champagne is a kind of wine a term we used to use for any kind of wine that had bubbles in it, wine that was fermented and made in such a way so that when you opened up the cork, it would fizz. And when I was a child, any such kind of wine was called champagne. Now, Champagne, of course, is the name of a region in France, and that's where originally that kind of wine was most well known and produced. I find it hard to believe that other countries didn't have their own kinds of wine like that, but that's what we called in the United States. And I'm not even talking about Europe, I'm talking about the United States. We called all that kind of wine that had sparkling bubbles in it, champagne. And then 30 years ago, the European Union adopted one of these protected designation of origin designations so that in Europe, you could only sell wine that is sparkling with that carbonation with the bubbles in it, and call it champagne if it comes from Champagne, France, the Champagne region of France. And if it doesn't come from the Champagne region of France, you can't call it champagne. You can call it sparkling wine, or you can call it each of the other countries, like I grew up, in an Italian father with an Italian father. So of course, Italians have a kind of wine that's like champagne. That's wine that it's fermented and made in a way that when you open it up, when you take the cork off the bottle, it bubbles and fizzes. But they call it spumante. Or there's more than one: spumante, prosecco, right? And so if it's prosecco wine, you have to call it prosecco. You can't call it champagne and try to get Americans who don't know the difference, buy our Italian sparkling wine, because you love champagne, right? No, you cannot do that. And you have to call it something else. You can call it prosecco if prosecco is designated as, and in fact it is designated. Wine is designated from the region of prosecco called prosecco. But Americans, they're not as familiar with the word prosecco as they are with champagne, right? Prosecco, what is that? Champagne, I know what champagne is, right? They think they know. But when the European Union adopted these protected designations, now you see in the United States, nobody calls that kind of wine champagne. I mean, when I go to stores, I do not see that kind of wine sold as champagne because unless it comes from Champagne, France, they call it many other things. Sparkling wine, for example, sparkling wines is a common term. And of course, you can buy Prosecco and Spumante. That's available also. And I'm sure champagne is available anywhere if you look for it in the United States. And so this has big impact on people's profits. And it has an issue about, it reflects the impact of culture and nationalism in relationship to consumption and economics, right? If you're a French champagne producer, you're proud of your designation of your wine as champagne wine. And you might become very upset, as was announced, I heard on the news 2-3 days ago, Russian government is producing its own sparkling wine and they're calling it champagne. Now, I don't know what the French are going to do, and I do not know what the European Union is going to do, but it was a news report. So in other words, it's in the media and it's a significant issue. And so to illustrate the sensitivity of these topics in terms of the political sensitivity, as well as the profit issues, here's something similar that we see being discussed today recently between Korea and China. So let me make sure that you are sharing the screen. You can see the screen, stop share, and go to screen share and to illustrate how this process works. And can you see that? Can you see the exercise there? The vote topic. Korea and China will eventually come to an agreement. I think what I have to do is have to mark it like that. And then just because I have to make sure that you're seeing the right screen. And so, yeah, I think you can see that, right? Here's my question to you. Korea and China will eventually come to an agreement on what and what is not kimchi. So here you see, here's the news report, and this is from December of last year. Just to give you Korean students in particular some kind of emotional, affective understanding of the significance of these topics. So this is from last year, at the end of last year. It says here, an argument or spat is raging this week over a Chinese state tabloid. A Chinese state newspapers claim that China had led the development of an international standard for what they call parokai, or pickled vegetables. In South Korea, the claim was seen as misleading because in the Chinese language, parokai also refers to kimchi, the fermented cabbage dish that plays an integral role in Korean cuisine. It wasn't clear whether the ambiguity was intentional or an example of the trolling for which the tabloid Global Times is famous. But it prompted reposts from South Korean officials and newspapers, along with a slew of barbed social media comments from the finer points about the finer points of pickled cabbage. If China plagiarizes the fermentation process of kimchi in the future, then South Korea's traditional culture may disappear, one anxious user wrote on Naver, a popular social media platform in South Korea. And it goes on here. I won't read the whole point, but I guess I'm trying to highlight here the emotional significance of these issues all over the world, including in Korea, including in Europe, because you're reading about, for example, how the European Court of Justice made court rulings, some very important court rulings that forced, for example, the Germans. When you think of Germany, you think of Germans, you think of what? Metschku, beer, bira, right? And for German culture, and German family culture, German cuisine, beer is something very special. Beer is to Germans, maybe even more so than what kimchi is to Koreans. And can you imagine? I mean, so for hundreds of years, the Germans had a law that was based in Bavaria, the Kingdom of Bavaria, which became part of modern Germany in the 19th century. The Kingdom of Bavaria, which has a long history and is a very famous place, that specifically defined beer as something that could only be produced with 4 ingredients: water, yeast, malt, and hops. You can't use anything else. You can't use other grains. You can't put something else in it and have it be called beer. And that law was called the Bavarian Beer Purity Law. And that had been in place for 500 years. I mean, keep in mind how important beer is to Germans. It's like what wine is to Italians, right? And in the European Union Court of Justice, the European Court of Justice ruled that the Germans could no longer forbid something produced in different ways in Italy, for example, or in Belgium or in France, in different ways. If the Belgians called their beer beer and they wanted to sell Belgian beer in Germany, the Germans had to allow that Belgian producer to call their product beer in Germany. Even though according to the 500-year-old Bavarian law, that Belgian beer or that Italian beer might not really be beer, according to that ancient German law and ancient German cuisine culture that said that beer is a certain thing. So, and that gives you an idea. I mean, just this report here about kimchi gives you a sense for the Korean students in particular, just how emotional those topics are. Because, you know, your nation typically includes a culture, right? We're all Koreans, which means we speak Korean language, we have Hangul alphabet, we dress with hanbok, and you have other factors, and including there's certain kinds of food that that make you Korean, that you grew up from the time you were born eating, like kimchi. And kimchi is what it means to be Korean. And now the Chinese might sell their products with their in the United States or export to the United States products they call kimchi, taking that business away from Korean producers of kimchi, because the Americans, what do they know what kimchi is? I mean, they buy, you know, they'll any sparkling wine that had carbonation in it, they called champagne. And so what if the Chinese take over the entire kimchi market in the United States, because they're so much bigger and they can produce so much and it's so much cheaper, and then Korean companies can't export their own kimchi because they can't compete with the Chinese call kimchi. So it goes on here that it touches on the cultural sore points in South Korea. Nearly 40% of the factory-made kimchi consumed there in South Korea is imported from China. So did you know that, Koreans? That 40% of the kimchi that you buy here in Korea is made in China? And the tradition of making the dish locally is fading as Korean families eat more non-Korean cuisine. The kimchi spat began last week when a global regulator based in Switzerland released a draft definition of the categories and requirements of payokai. That is the name in Mandarin for a kimchi-like dish of fermented vegetables that is popular in the Western Chinese province of Sichuan. The regulator, the International Organization for Standardization, typically issues such guidelines to ensure that products and services in one country can be used in the industrial processes of another. Industrial, that's interesting. In this case, it said that a lack of unified and explicit product quality and safety guarantees in the payokai industry greatly limits the international trade and circulation of payokai products. But the ISO, the International Organization for Standardization, this organization said specifically that its definition does not apply to kimchi. But in an article over the weekend, Global Times, which is fiercely nationalistic, said the new standard proved that China had set an industry benchmark for the international payokai market, a term that essentially includes kimchi. The tabloids needling, if that's what it was, touched a nerve in South Korea, where many people feel threatened by China's increasingly assertive presence in the region. Some social media users accuse Global Times of cultural appropriation. The Global Times is using Korean culture for its own economic benefit, even though, of course, the Koreans are the one that developed it. South Korea's Agriculture Ministry said in a statement on Sunday that the ISO's payokai standard was completely not related to our kimchi, adding that the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization had published a definition of kimchi in 2001. South and North Korea also campaigned separately to put the kimchi making season, a centuries-old tradition known as kimjang, on the UNESCO's intangible heritage register. The agency agreed to both Korea's requests. So kimjang is coming up again. So maybe some of our foreign students can find out more about kimjang, the kimchi making season. So my question to you is, Korea and China will eventually come to an agreement on what and what is not kimchi. Do you strongly agree, agree, neutral, cannot decide, disagree, strongly disagree? So let me temporarily stop the share, go to breakout rooms, and we've got 4 people here. So, well, I guess maybe I'll just keep you in that one room. So where did you come to on this scale? The 3 students in class today, where do you fit in this scale? Do you think that China and Korea will eventually come to an agreement on what is and what is not kimchi? And explain your position. And I will write a statement as well. And I will flip a coin to determine my position. And so I'm going to find my lucky coin here. And there it is. And let me see who's going to speak for your group. By the way, for the one group, we have Marie is heads, and it is heads. So Marie, you're going to speak for Owen Tech and UJE. So help Marie prepare for your group's explanation of where you fit on the scale. And I'll let Marie tell me what I have to write on. And heads on 1 or 2, agree. And it is disagree, tails. So heads, I am neutral, and it's tails. So it's tails. So heads, I'm disagree, and it's disagree. So I'm gonna write a statement on disagree.
Sir, are you going to put us in a breakout room, or?
No, you're all in one room because there's only 3 students.
But then we're speaking now here.
Yeah, so you're one. Oh, so you're in one group now, together. Or you want me to put you in? You want me to assign you to one group? Okay, I can do that. I see what you mean. So okay, I assign automatically. Okay, so yeah. All right, so please join the group. I just thought you were already in a group because there's only 3 students, but now join the room 1 so that you can talk to each other without me hearing you. So join room 1, Marie, Owen Tech, and UJE. And help Marie come to a decision whether or not you think Korea and China will come to an agreement on what is and what is not kimchi, and why. Okay. I have my statement. Okay. Marie, please tell me where the class decided it fits on the scale.
Yeah, so to be honest, I didn't know like what I thought of this question. I didn't have any knowledge about it.
Well, you
But
do. You do, because I think you probably, as a European, you probably are sensitive to these issues. I mean, I can't remember, like, Belgian waffles. I mean, they're famous, Belgian waffles.
yeah,
Although it's a geographic orientation, there must be something famous in Belgium that's produced in Belgium that Belgian
beer.
producers want to be called. They want nobody else to be allowed to be able to use that name, whether it be, I don't know. I don't know what I don't. I think I did hear something about Belgian waffles being a topic of dispute or something. So you do have some understanding of the sensitivity of this, right? Because it's a worldwide issue, not just a Korean or issue. But anyway, so go ahead. Go ahead. What were you going to say?
Yeah, the others, they had a lot of arguments about this, so they wanted to tell about it.
Okay. Let's hear what they own. Tech. What did you have to say?
Professor, can I speak first?
Yes.
In my opinion, there is no need to think of its. There is no need to think of it as a natural problem. As a global interest and reputation for kimchi increased, it seems to have become controversial despite the groundless claims of Chinese media. Since the Korean Peninsula and China differ according to the environment, as well as preferences, the historically of kimchi should be judged based on cultural origins. And from the perspective of cultural origin, differences between Korean kimchi and Chinese pickled vegetables are found in the way vegetables are vegetables are found. In China, vegetables are pickled and stored with alcohol, such as alcohol and vinegar, while in Korea, vegetables are pickled and fermented with soy sauce and salt. Therefore,
Okay.
China can be divided
Uh-huh.
into a culture of stored lactic acid and Korea into a culture of fermented lactic acid.
Okay, but that's I agree with you, and you're right. But the problem is, what if a Chinese company puts the name kimchi on that Chinese vegetable that's made with alcohol in a different way, but they call it kimchi? They put the label kimchi on the box or on the can or the jar, and they export it to the U.S. calling it kimchi. I mean, that's the issue. They're going to use the name because I think many people, for example, many people I know in the US, they know what kimchi is now. Kimchi, I can even find it in my my store in my little hometown in Ohio, no, there are no Koreans in my hometown in Ohio, but in the supermarket, I can buy kimchi there. So more and more people know what kimchi is in the US. They know what the name is, kimchi. But what if a Chinese company decides they're going to put the name, I'm going to put on my label, I'm going to call this kimchi and sell it in America, even though it's not really the real version of kimchi made in Korea. What is Korea going to do about it? What is the Korean company going to do about it?
If you put it like this, it's like obvious that we disagree.
Yeah, that's the sensitivity and the anger and the money involved, and that again highlights, because this is of course about the European Union. Can you imagine with 27 different member states in the European Union, all next door to each other, all European, that they have different kinds of the same type of cheese? Like, I'm sure, you know, of course, there's Italian blue cheese and French blue cheese, and there must be a Belgian blue cheese, and maybe a famous name of Parmesan, and there's a famous name for a regional name for that kind of cheese. But somebody who wants to make money might steal that name and put that name on their label for their product, even though their product is really not the same, because it's not grown in the same place. The cows are not the same kind of cows for the milk. The food, the grass the cows eat is not the same kind of grass that they eat where it comes from originally. I mean, I heard that I heard that today or yesterday on the news about, again, these conflict issues about that something has to be labeled by the region from which it comes. So you just mentioned that Korean kimchi, it's different for many reasons, including the fact that there's something about Korean soil and Korean environment, Korean weather, that makes kimchi different from Chinese kimchi, or whatever you want to call it. So I don't disagree. I wanted to highlight how these issues of coming to agreement on the regulation in the European Union among 27 member states that often have a long history of conflict with each other before becoming part of the European Union, it's a really impressive success if they have been able to do it. And it overcomes and has to deal with much emotion, overcome much emotion, because we're talking about culture. We're talking about what it means to be German. For many Germans, beer is not the only thing what it means to be German, but it's a really important part of being German is beer, or many things. So to give you an idea of this challenge, and this happens primarily through the European Court of Justice and the regulatory agencies that have this task assigned to them by the European Union lawmaking process. So that's covered in the textbook, right? That you read about the different European Union agencies to oversee standard rules and regulations regarding food product safety, medicine products and standards, and safety standards as well for medicine. This all has to be built and created and agreed when you have 27 different member states with different regulation histories, different regulation ideas, and they have to come to an agreement, and then they have to agree in the future, now and in the future, to accept the ruling of these particular agencies and in creating the European Union that they all have to agree to. It's really, really a challenge. So creating a single market is not only about removing tariffs on imports from other European member states, right? That's not even the most important aspect of creating a single European economic market. It's very important, but it's not sufficient. It's not just removing the barriers from importing products from your neighbor European country. It means building a single European market means coming to an agreement on thousands and thousands and thousands of rules and regulations. And that means compromise. That means coming up with new rules and regulations, including rules and regulations that have very strong emotional content, like I think it's called the Reinheitsgebot, the German purity the German beer purity laws, you know, and they've done that. And that's why I wanted to ask you, do you think that Korea and China will come to an agreement on what and what is not kimchi? And so to give you some participation credit on that, so I don't forget, let's go to the cyber campus and ask you to vote on whether or not the Chinese and the Europeans, the Chinese and the Koreans will come to an agreement on regulating the label name kimchi. And so please vote. No, it's disconnected. I got to log in again. Stop that. Go back to policymaking in the European Union. Vote. So do you think that eventually the Korean and Chinese governments will come to an agreement on using the label kimchi on products produced in China or Korea and Korea? So one, you cannot decide, one, you agree, one, you disagree, strongly disagree. Yeah, I mean, the fact that I didn't know that 40% of the kimchi that you buy in Korean stores was actually produced in China. Oh no! So let me tell you, I had to write disagree because I flipped the coin. So let me write what I wrote. China and Korea will not come to an agreement on what is and what is not kimchi because China will not view the issue as worth negotiating. You know, it's big, it's large. Beijing will not punish Chinese companies that export products they call kimchi, even if the Korean government complains, because Beijing will not see what significant costs it will pay if it does not comply with the demands coming from the Korean government. I mean, what is the Korean government going to do? Is it going to put sanctions on Chinese products? Is it going to punish Chinese companies in some way? Maybe, but you know, China is a much bigger market, much bigger player, much bigger actor. And all of this discussion is to help you see the significance of the challenges in creating the single market, And that means coming up with common rules and regulations for regulating the single market. And it is really hard work, taking many years, taking much expert knowledge and much bargaining and negotiation and compromise. And one of the major sources of or arenas or institutional spaces in which this bargaining and negotiation and compromise and decision making is made is the European Court of Justice. Because remember, until recently, 80% of the European Union law is business and commerce and trade law, right? So the European Court of Justice is the judicial division of the European Union. It has responsibilities for interpreting the meaning of the treaties. And you know, the treaties began with the European coal and steel communities back in the early 1950s. And that's the first one. And resolving disputes regarding the effects of the European Union law between the member states, EU institutions, and also individuals. So there's some description here about the European Court of Justice. And by the way, this European Court of Justice, this seemed to be a big focus of hostility by those supporting United Kingdom leaving the European Union. They really resented, it came up in their rhetoric, in their campaign appeals, that they really did not want Britain to be subject to the rule of the European Court of Justice, because the European Court of Justice has successfully established the principle over the years since the 1950s that its rulings overcome or supersede or surpass all of the court rulings of the member states if there's a conflict with European Union law. And of course, the European Court of Justice determines what European Union law is. And so this is a really important body, right? And it consists of 27 judges, one judge from each member state, and they are appointed for 6-year terms. So they don't serve for life. They're there for only 6 years, which can be renewable. And with consensual agreement among all the member states, if the member states agree that that person who's been a judge can stay on for another 6 years or longer. So there has to be a pretty positive assessment of that judge's performance by each of the member states. The European Court of Justice has a president and it has 8 advocates general. And the reason these advocates, they make the arguments before the European Court of Justice judges. So the judges, they don't explain their decisions. When they make a ruling, European Court of Justice makes a ruling, they don't explain their decisions in writing. They rather rely upon, you have to rely upon the written arguments and the written explanations for the positions that the advocates general made in making their case before the European Court of Justices. Right? So when the European Court of Justice makes a decision, you look at the advocate general who won his case or her case, and that's the explanation that the advocate general used, their argument. That's the explanation for the law. Those advocates general, they review the cases that are brought before the European Court of Justice, and then they deliver the individual opinions, written opinions. And if you're someone whose business is very much affected, for example, by the European Court of Justice, you want to understand the explanation of the law. You want to understand why the European Court of Justice ruled the way it did, because you want to make sure that you have some new idea for a new product or a new business strategy, and you might be concerned that you might be violating the European Court of Justice ruling. So you want to know more information. You want more information, so you have to look at the opinions of the advocates general that were presented and get that more information. And so there's some description of the structure of the European Court of Justice. There is the General Court, which is the court that decides if an issue is going to go to a higher level of responsibility. And then there's the European Union Civil Service Tribunal. This is a part of the European Court of Justice. It's regards disputes between European Union employees and their institutions, and it rules on these cases. So that's an important point to keep in mind. We call Europe, but Europe is very diverse culturally, right? I mean, Southern Italians culturally are very different from Swedish people in terms of their attitudes, in terms of their implicit understandings of what is the right and wrong way to behave and act. So it's very important. The point I'm trying to make is it's very important that if you're going to have a European Union civil service, there is lots of potential for culture conflict, misunderstandings, disputes between Swedish and Italian and Greek and Estonian and Maltese civil servants with each other and with their bosses. So this is a sensitive issue, a sensitive topic. And so there's a special court within the European Court of Justice that deals with those disputes. And you can see how it's significant and important. So Olson, the textbook author, goes on to argue that regarding European integration, the European Court of Justice doesn't get enough credit for the important role it has played in European integration. He calls it an unsung hero. In other words, people don't sing about its glorious feats, even though it's made significant advances over the years. And European Court of Justice has greatly facilitated European integration process through its judgments, because, when the European Coal and Steel Community Treaty is written, the countries sign it, and you look at the European Coal and Steel Community Treaty, and you can find them on the internet, and you read them in English or German or Estonian, and they're not that long. These treaties are not that long, and they're not written in complicated language. They're treaty documents, and treaty language is general and vague and broad on purpose. It's written almost at a level of not even high school. It's like written at the level of a newspaper level difficulty or complexity of language. And that's done on purpose, because the disputes and the different disagreements they try to come to an agreement. So they don't want to, the member states want to come to an agreement on a treaty. So they don't want to get into very specific language, because that could generate more disagreements. So they write these treaties, and the language is about the same as what you read in the newspaper in terms of its complexity. And then the European Court of Justice finds that it has to interpret these general vague language treaties. And they do. And they put the content in a sense, they put the detailed content of these treaties into the treaty through their judgments. And the European Court of Justice, its responsibility is to create a body of European Union law which is interpreted uniformly across all 27 member states, from Estonia to Malta to Cyprus to Portugal. And it is applied throughout the European Union. And again, Europe is the most culturally diverse place in the world, even more culturally diverse than India or Africa. So lots of opportunities for misunderstandings and disagreements. I want to jump ahead and talk about, for example, what is that beer? Let's see if I can do a keyword on beer. Yeah, okay, yeah, here's the 1984 European Commission case, Commission versus Federal Republic of Germany. The European Court of Justice ruled that the 1516 German Bavarian law, the Reinheitsgebot, requiring beer to consist only of malted barley, hops, yeast, and water, could not be used to prohibit the sale of a product we call beer from other European Union countries that added or used other materials in the production process, like sorghum, rice, maize, flavoring, or coloring. Like American beer, for example, they often use rice in making American beer, and we call it beer. Rolling Rock, Miller, that Budweiser that you find in the 7-Eleven or at the Green Farm Mart, that's not made just with yeast, water, and hops. That's made with rice. And according to this old law, you couldn't call it beer and sell it in Germany as beer, because that's not beer according to this ancient German law. And the European Court of Justice ruled that Germany could not forbid selling products called beer in Germany if the same product is called beer in France or Italy. If the Italians make beer with wheat, or they make beer with rice or whatever, and they call it beer, then you have to let the Italian company that makes that beer call it beer in Germany when they sell it to German buyers. And that's like kimchi for Koreans. And the Germans accepted it. Germans drink more beer than anyone else. They drink 173 liters per person a year. The European Court of Justice ruled that Germany must allow foreign beer from other countries to be called beer, as long as it's called beer in that home country and that production country, and they have the list of the products or the ingredients on the product. So you can call that beer, but make sure you have a list on a label on the bottle of what's used to make that beer. And of course, the German government claimed, oh no, that this Reinheitsgebot law, that's in place because it's for the health of Germans, and we have to keep German people healthy because they drink so much beer, and now who knows what's going to be in that beer, and it's going to be bad for them. And so they became very emotional about the health of Germans, but they had to accept it. The European Court of Justice ruled in 1987 that Germany could not make a public health argument to ban beer imports as long as brewers printed a list of ingredients on the labels. And these rulings dramatically eased the task of building the single market. And that's how to build. You got to make this happen. It just doesn't happen by removing tariffs on and taxes on imports. No. There's all of this hard work in making a single market out of 27 member states. Another famous case is the Cassis Dijon case in 1979. The European Court of Justice ruled that Germany must allow this French fruit liqueur to be sold as a fruit liqueur. Liqueur in Germany, despite German law requiring that a fruit liqueur must have at least 25% alcohol to be called a fruit liqueur. That's according to German law. I don't know how old it is, but Cassis Dijon in France only has 20% alcohol. And the European Court of Justice ruled that the German restriction violated the Treaty of Rome that created the European Economic Community from 1957, right? Wow, Germany was violating the Treaty of Rome by not allowing Cassis Dijon to be sold in Germany. Whoa! The Treaty of Rome, Cassis Dijon, 20% alcohol. Oh. And the people that wrote that European the people that write and sign these treaties, whether they be the European Coal and Steel Community Treaty, or the Treaty of Paris, or the Treaty of Rome establishing the European Economic Community, they don't know that the Reinheitsgebot and the Cassis Dijon cases are going to come up. They write these very vague language treaties, and the treaty could be dead, could be just on paper, and it not really have much significance. But the European Court of Justice's rulings have helped give these treaties real significance in the lives of European consumers and European citizens. And the court does not have yet anyway jurisdiction over family or criminal law, just over economic and business and trade law. But because of neo-functional spillover, the European Court of Justice is going to have more and more impact on human rights in its rulings, because it's going to have to deal with regulating labor, because the single market has the 4 freedoms, right? Free movement in the single market of goods, services, capital, and labor, human beings. And so how you treat those human beings is part of building a single market, which means the European Court of Justice is going to be pushed to have to intervene in terms of pension regulation law, for regulating pensions for workers, for retirement law. There's more and more build over economic spillover, neo-functional spillover to push them in that direction. And the British knew this. The British understood, everybody understands it, but the British were the ones that became the most hostile to this, that the European Court of Justice, they're going to start ruling basically on cultural issues, not to mention trade issues, because that was the intent. If you're going to create a European Union and you're going to work with economics and business, it's going to have impact on criminal law and labor law. It's just going to. So they describe how the European Court of Justice works, because our time is almost up. So I don't want to start something too much new that I can't conclude here. That they issue written proceedings, of course. A lawyer files the application with the court register for a court case. That it is then published in the European Court of Justice official journal. It describes the dispute. And of course, everybody's supposed to be watching this. The businesses, the lawyers of the European Union, the businesses of the European Union, because they want direction and guidance in terms of what they can expect to be the future rules and regulations for their businesses. And when among 27 member states that often have different traditions and histories of rules and regulations. So the European Court of Justice attempts to be transparent in its work, because you're trying to guide this vast number of private businesses as well as government agencies and regulators in terms of guiding them and moving them, and of course the court systems of the member states themselves to be moving in a common direction. The European Court of Justice cannot enforce its judgments because it doesn't have a police force. It doesn't have powers to enforce its judgments. It's got to rely upon the member states and the European Commission to enforce its judgments. And that means the member states. And that was the complaint, just to conclude now, that was the complaint made with regard to what the Polish and Hungarian governments were doing with regard to human rights, that they were being sued, Poland and Hungary being sued before the European Court of Justice, and it was taking a long time. And then suddenly this year we see that now the European Commission is basically going to use its ability to disperse Corona-19 pandemic recovery money as an incentive to enforce the rulings of the European Court of Justice and the European Union itself. Big move, big development. And so we're going to be paying a lot of attention to this. Okay, anybody have any questions? If not, I'm going to stop class and say.
Professor?
Yeah.
I'm not sure about this, but is that Flynn effect? Is that Flynn means that Flynn effect?
Is it fully in effect? Yes. The European Court of
Ah.
Justice, I mean, and that was established through European Court of Justice rulings and behavior of the other actors in the European Union, that they have come to accept that the European Court of Justice and the European treaties that the European Court of Justice interprets, therefore the European Court of Justice has control, is superior to all other national court systems in terms of its rulings. And that was maybe some vague idea 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago, but it's become real after the European Coal and Steel Committee began and the European Court of Justice started doing its work.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.